All right, perfect. So thank you everyone for joining our March Boston 365 session. And these are all of the places that you could find us. If you're not subscribed to our newsletter and getting regular updates on our sessions, you can do so on our website. And of course, we post all of our previous sessions on YouTube. So moving forward, just very brief. My name is Dimitri. I'm one of the organizers of the user group here. Along beside me, I have Mike and Bill as well. They're both experts in this field and pleasure to host this user group with. So that being said, if you weren't able to join us last session, we had a great topic by Mike Dumka about how to evaluate Viva Topics and really explore how it has an impact on your overall knowledge and content strategy. So I'm not sure if we have this up on our YouTube channel just yet.
I uploaded it last night, so it's up there.
Right. So definitely check that out. It was a great presentation. Really shows you how to structure a pilot in a way that lets you evaluate the technology within the context of your business. That being said, we have some updates from last time. There have actually been quite a few updates, so we've done our best to filter down to the ones that we think are most interesting or to our users here in the user group. So with that being said, the first thing we want to talk about is a public preview that was announced for having shared channels within a private Microsoft team. So as you all know, teams started with standard channels. They've introduced private channels as a way to narrow down the scope of who can have access to a subset of data. And now there's a new third option coming out, which is where you can actually expand the scope of who can have access into a channel. And Microsoft is really giving this the first party experience where you're going to have the tabs, you're going to have bots, you're going to have secure collaboration, graph extensions, the whole 9 yards. And this public preview is rolling out at the end of this month and set to complete early next month.
That's similar to like an admin or a private. Does it do another SharePoint site?
Yeah. So if you think of it, kind of the private channels takes your standard users and you have to like narrow it down to a subset of those users. This is going a bit in the other direction where you have your standard users and you can expand it out to be additional users, like external users or other people that you're pulling into specific channel conversations.
I find the private channel difficult because the admin of the team site can't see them. And so it's like governance around it, it's a pain.
Well, there's a new feature coming up in a few slides that will help address that challenge as well. So just moving forward, so the next update is in Yammer. We don't do a whole lot of Yammer updates, to be completely honest, but I thought this one was pretty cool. So there's a new feature rolling out where you can upvote, similar like Reddit, responses to questions that are being asked. So we've talked about the new kind of Q&A feature of Yammer probably a year ago on this user group. And now we actually have a way to not only mark a best answer, but also to vote on what appears to be the best answer given the question. Moving forward, Microsoft, since they've acquired LinkedIn, they've been continuously looking for new ways to tie it into the M365 service. If you have this connected on your tenant level from your organization into LinkedIn, there's going to be a new tab that's going to appear in one-on-one chats, which is going to be the user's LinkedIn profile. So clicking on that might give you a little bit more context for who you're talking to, a little bit more of what their background is, their skill sets, and so forth. Another pretty exciting update is with Viva Topics. There's now the ability to use syntax taxonomies to help generate the topics. I'm sure Chris is going to touch a bit on that in our featured presentation today. So I'm very excited that this is coming forward. I think this is going to really help, kind of put together the unstructured, unmanaged terms that the AI engine picks up along with the structured content and taxonomies you might already have. Moving forward, Microsoft Forms. I know a lot of our clients use Forms, and the sharing experience has always been a little bit tricky. It wasn't always clear if I'm sharing the form with a colleague so that they can make edits and see responses, or if I was sending it to somebody to actually go and fill it out. So Microsoft is kind of splitting that sharing experience into two separate functions. One's going to be when you click on send, it's going to ask if you want to collaborate or if you want to duplicate. And then the other option is to actually send and collect responses. So this should hopefully take some of that confusion out. Moving forward, Microsoft has been trying to kill off basic authentication for quite a while, and it's for very good reason. It's sending your passwords in clear text. So anyone snooping your network along the lines can really pick it up and use it. Not a good security practice. And there's been a lot of communications over the last several years of really moving away from this. In our experience, we still have clients with some legacy like multifunction printer devices that were still using basic auth to be able to go and upload or send an email of a PDF scan. We've had other scenarios where there were some legacy customizations that were not using API tokens, but rather, impersonating the user with some of the old RESTful APIs. So in any case, if you're still using this, Microsoft killed basic authentication earlier this month. So if things are broken and you're scratching your head, this is probably a good reason. That being said, if you go into your Azure AD logs, if you look at the blog post behind this one, there's a specific filter you can add on your authorization requests to show you all of the users and devices and give you a lot more detail for who's actually using basic auth within your organization. All right, so next is a bit about Endpoint Manager, which Intune is part of. So there's a new settings around the catalog of editions. So previously, if you wanted to configure a Mac OS setting, you had to create a custom template and really specify the Mac equivalent of a registry of where to go and what to configure. Microsoft is bringing more and more of that to be easier to administrate by kind of taking a lot of the more common ones and putting it into a first-class experience like we have with the Windows operating system. So definitely welcome to that, and especially with some of the upticks that we're seeing in Mac out in the workforce. Related to another endpoint manager feature, when we're going and we're starting to build templates around apps, they've introduced this new search bar at the top, which really makes it easy to find what you're looking for. I mean, if you've ever used this and you've tried to add an app, there's literally hundreds of apps that are available, just all of the different Microsoft services. And unfortunately, it would load about 25 or 50 at a time. So you have to scroll to the bottom, click load more. So it could take a little bit of time. This should really speed things up in that front. Moving forward, so OneDrive and SharePoint now has an easier way to access all of your standard and private channels. So Bill, this is what you were asking about a little bit earlier in this meeting. So this new feature is that when you're in a Teams connected SharePoint site and you go into your documents library, you'll see the top level folders that are related to channels. And if it's a private channel, you'll see a lock icon appearing to the right of it, as well as folders that are in part of that SharePoint site that are not associated with the Teams channel. So hopefully this will make things a little bit easier when you're organizing content, because otherwise you just don't have a good representation of, if I rename this folder, am I going to break my channel? Or if I put stuff in a folder, how come people can't see it in Teams? And so hopefully this should help make things a little bit easier across the board. This is coming out later this month and into early next month. Going forward, okay, so Microsoft introduced a feature a while back where every meeting online, as they call it, essentially means whenever you schedule a meeting in Outlook, it would automatically add a Teams meeting within the body of it. So you didn't have to click that button in your toolbar to go ahead and add that in. I know some companies are not using Teams for meetings. They're using Zoom or Cisco or other platforms. So this new feature now allows those other platforms to also be auto-added for every meeting online. Thanks to the company I work for, Turn Digital, for sponsoring the user group, helping pay all the bills and all the regulatory fees to keep us as a nonprofit. So with that being said, we want to pass it over to one of the original co-founders of this user group and a great presenter, Chris Warlick.
Awesome. Thanks, Dimitri. Appreciate it. Let me go ahead and share out my screen. Just my setup here. I am at home right now, although we are open at the MTC in Boston. I am broadcasting from home, so you may hear or see from my wife or our kids at some point. I also have a single device, so I'm not able to see right now any sort of chat or hands being raised. So, certainly Dimitri or Mike or anyone, keep an eye on the chat for me and just let me know and we'll go from there. I'm going to start my countdown here just to make sure that I'm staying on target. And we'll go from there. So yeah, my name is Chris Warlick. I am a principal architect at the Microsoft Technology Center here in Burlington, Massachusetts. We're going to talk a little bit about SharePoint Syntex, how it relates to Viva Topics. This is a session I'll be presenting at the Microsoft 365 conference in Vegas in April. So still working on trimming some of the slides and the demos and getting it down into the time frame. So targeting for around 60 minutes, have time built in for Q&A. but want to give folks a primer on what SharePoint Syntex is, the different types of models that we can process, the difference between a form processing model and a document understanding model. Spend a little bit of time on roadmap and resources, and Dimitri hit on at least one of the things that's coming soon. And then save time certainly on the back end for Q&A. So when we think about the typical content life cycles, I grab my pointer here. Typically, and I've been in the SharePoint space for around 20 years, back since around 2001, and certainly I've done a lot with SharePoint and Office 365 as it's evolved. I think typically content gets created, people create documents, Word documents, Excel spreadsheets, what have you. Ideally, they go through some sort of document classification, whether it be through folder-based metadata defaults or using content types. In some cases, metadata is being extracted. People are promoting columns as metadata. So certainly if they're in there tagging the document and we're applying, this is the name of the client, or this is the name of the policy, or the policy number that's being related to it. Sometimes we're assigning labels to documents. Labels could be assigned for at least one of a number of reasons. The two primary I see is assigning a label for security purposes to protect it from an information protection perspective. The second reason is retention policies, making sure content is being purged or deleted after some period of time. Hopefully through the process of us tagging content, it's making it easier to search and discover and filter. All that leads to the holy grail around knowledge discovery and finding content, which hopefully will generate reuse of content. And this is the life cycle, the wheel that many of us have been on, certainly in the last 20 years of SharePoint, but even before that with other document management platforms, whether it's Documentum or FileNet or, dare I say, Lotus Notes and file servers as well. So pretty typical content lifecycle model. When we think about Microsoft 365 and what we're doing with the Microsoft Content Services Platform, certainly we think about it in really kind of two concepts. One is really around the content storage. So we want to make sure that the platform is highly available, it's scalable, things that we require around encryption, making sure the content is secure, the artificial intelligence we're doing, the indexing for search and discovery, giving customers the ability to define policies, again, for retention policies, security and compliance, controlling access through things like conditional access policies, and really just making sure that we're having a user-centric approach, whether it's people putting content on their OneDrive and having it just there for themselves, whether it be leveraging things like Teams or Yammer communities, and then really having these first-party front-end services such as Teams and SharePoint and OneDrive, which are all built on top of the Microsoft 365 Content Services Platform. We have a great partner ecosystem, many partners that are building solutions on our platform and tying in with us, but ultimately thinking about delivering that content wherever folks are. More and more, it's on a phone. That phone could be an Android phone or Windows, not a Windows phone, an iPhone. So it could be a Windows device or a Mac device or an iPad or a browser-based client. So really, as we think about the platform, SharePoint and what has been SharePoint historically is really providing that content services layer that other services like OneDrive and Teams are built on top of. As we think about kind of the Lego blocks, we've been talking for many years, probably close to 2 years now, about this concept of Project Cortex. In fact, I did a session on Project Cortex, I think over a year, maybe even 2 years ago. Project Cortex, first off, really was a brand. That brand has been realized in two products. The first product is the focus of tonight, is what we're going to talk about, is around SharePoint Syntex. SharePoint Syntex is focused around that document classification, that ability to extract and promote metadata from structured documents like invoices and purchase orders, or unstructured documents. Think about statements of work and other documents like that might be contracts, that might be unstructured documents. We also have released, right around this time last year, a product called Viva Topics. And Viva Topics was the second part of Project Cortex, and that is really giving us the ability to build basically a Wikipedia on steroids, where the artificial intelligence can look through the content, look through the people and the sites, and build relationships that a human can then curate and review. Those topics are starting to show up not just inside of SharePoint, inside of Microsoft Search, and over the next few months, you'll start to see it show up inside of the Outlook client, inside of Teams, and inside of Yammer as well. Both Viva Topics and SharePoint Syntex are built on top of what we've been doing for many years on Microsoft 365, the search, discovery, the Microsoft Graph. And SharePoint Syntex in particular leverages not only the SharePoint services for content storage and content processing, but also the Power Platform, things like Power Automate, AI Builder, as well as some other Azure cognitive services under the covers. So again, I'm not going to read this slide to you. I'm going to give you these slides. This gives you a little bit more detail, a little more context around what I was just speaking to. But really, if you think about it, we build the Microsoft Cloud with Azure at the foundational layer, where Azure is providing a number of infrastructure services and also a number of platform services, cognitive services. We then build products on top of that, like the Power Platform, like AI Builder and Power Automate. And SharePoint Syntex really becomes a consumer of that. And really the goal of SharePoint Syntex is to take some of those services that might be more infrastructure services or platform services and make them more approachable to the typical knowledge worker, to the typical information worker who may not be a professional developer, may not be thinking about building things with Azure Cognitive Services directly, doing things with Lewis or doing things with Logic Apps. We really want to make this more approachable for anyone in the organization, not just a limited set of developers to build on top of those core services. So as I mentioned, for the purpose of tonight, we're going to focus a lot around SharePoint Syntex. SharePoint Syntex has a new site template of a content center. A content center is where we can centrally store and manage the models. And I'm going to talk through in more detail what these different types of models are. Viva Topics, on the other hand, as I mentioned, is starting to have this new concept of a topic card. The topic card, if you think about it, I equate it to the people card folks are familiar with. When you're inside of Teams and you hover over a person, you get that rich people card that tells you their name, their title. You see the LinkedIn information coming in there, their presence. The topic card gives us that same sort of capability that when I hover over a keyword or a phrase or an acronym, we get some context around other similar names for that, people that know something about that, a rich description around what that might be. And again, over time, you'll see those topic cards showing up not just in SharePoint, not just in Microsoft Search, but also inside of Teams and Yammer and Outlook. In fact, just this week, I just set up the new Viva Topics app inside of Microsoft Teams, which enables us to bring the Viva Topics Topic Center, which is another type of site collection and a site template. We organize the curation of the different topic pages, as well as start to suggest to people topics they may want to associate with themselves, which again, drives some of the relevancy with inside of the engine as well. So again, this is a little bit more detail, kind of summarizing some of the things that I just said to you. But again, the key part of this is that SharePoint Syntex and Viva Topics today are largely focused around content that lives inside of Microsoft 365, primarily documents. Over time, you will see us continue to extend this outside of Microsoft 365. So through the concept of the Microsoft Graph, today, we have the ability to bring in third-party content sources. A good example is ServiceNow. We have a connector for ServiceNow. Over time, you'll start to see us take those content sources that today we make available to users through Microsoft Search. You'll see that also become a content source that can be available within things like Viva Topics as well. So we're definitely focused on not just building a great experience for content and experiences inside of SharePoint and inside of Office 365, but through the Microsoft Graph, enabling us to start to extend this over time, not just for search and discovery, but into other parts of the platform. So we think about Viva Topics and SharePoint Syntex and how it becomes better together. The first area that I'm really excited about, and I'll show you this in the demonstration in a minute, is how SharePoint Syntex can identify and discover certain things, associate them with a model, and then based on that model being associated, let's say a purchase order, we can assign a retention policy. We can also assign a Microsoft Information Protection sensitivity label. Those labels can be used across the platform, including in Viva Topics, to drive visibility. So maybe we don't want Viva Topics to show and discover certain things based on certainly sites we want to exclude, but maybe we also want to do it based on a label being applied to a document. We're going to see more, as Dimitri mentioned, where we have the ability for Syntex to start to seed taxonomy and items that are inside of the term store, the managed metadata service. And even today, we can go into the managed metadata service and promote and recommend certain things that are in the managed metadata service, certain metadata elements that we can actually recommend from the term set, be promoted, and create a topic page as well. And then over time, you're going to see more and more integration across the entire platform. Really excited, and I'll show you this in a bit, some of the work that we've started to do around document assembly. So I'm going to show you an experience where I take a document that comes in, have the ability to extract and promote metadata, run it through a workflow for approval, write that information to a list, and then have a smart, intelligent template that I can use that template to then generate other documents off of without having to have someone open up Word on the desktop and do a lot of other really complex things. We can actually do that directly through the browser. And I'm going to show you that experience in a bit around document assembly. So when we think about traditional artificial intelligence, historically, we've heard about the concept of machine learning and machine teaching. So when we think about things like document understanding as an example, we can take in a set of documents, and then a human can go in and they can tag a sample set. They can say, these 5 documents are positive examples of things that look like the document. And these are documents that are representative of negative examples. This is not something that is this type of a document. The AI can then say, hey, I know enough about this based on the information you've given me. I can now have a high degree of confidence and give a confidence level that the next time I see documents that look like that, I can intelligently recognize it. I can tag it as a certain content type, maybe give it an information protection label, give it a retention policy, and then promote metadata. Viva Topics, on the other hand, acts a bit more like conventional machine learning, where when you think about that, it's taking a large amount of content across the environment, it's crawling it, it's indexing it, and that's identifying patterns. And with that, it's then making recommendations around certain topic pages that might exist. And then a human can go in and review it. So the best example I've heard of is you think of Viva Topics a bit as maybe an intern that you bring in, and the intern maybe gets it 70, 80% of the way there. But over time, through a combination of teaching and reinforcement, you help the intern to get smarter and smarter and learn how to classify things appropriately. Over time, as we're going through and saying that this is relevant, this is not relevant, we're just training the model more and more and making it more intelligent over time. So SharePoint Syntex, again, part of what we're doing is certainly giving you the ability to build your own custom models, but we're also building pre-trained models. So for example, things like invoices and expenses. So over time, you're going to see more and more cases where we've identified models that are pretty standard, pretty consistent. And rather than you having to train the AI on how to recognize that model, we're going to provide those for you out of the box. And again, over time, you'll see more and more of the work around the content assembly, which I'm going to show you. And then you're going to see even more work we're doing around natural language, having the ability to be more intelligent with things like OCR and other document formats as well.
Chris, we have a question in the chat.
Sure.
Is SharePoint Syntex licensed differently from the Viva modules? Coming from Greg.
It is. And Greg, I've got a slide on licensing at the end, but the short story is that Viva is sold individually or as a suite. So things like Viva Connections is typically included with most licenses, really based on SharePoint and Yammer and Stream. Viva Learning is included for some content sources. Then there's a premium version for third-party learning management systems. Viva Topics is a standalone license that you either acquire on its own or you buy it as part of the Viva suite. And then Viva Insights is broken out into 2 flavors: Personal Insights, which is really the evolution of My Analytics, and then Manager and Leader Insights, which is typically an add-on. And you're going to see more in the Viva suite for things like Ally, around organizational key results. And then we just announced recently bringing in Glint from LinkedIn for employee listening. SharePoint Syntex is outside of all of that licensing. So SharePoint Syntex is its own licensing model. I'll get into that in a little bit, but it is sold separately from Viva Topics and the Viva suite.
Thank you.
So, thanks. So when we think about the models, I'm gonna talk really about 2 model types. The first type is around document understanding. So document understanding, again, typically is unstructured documents. Again, I use the example of a contract or a statement of work. We typically need anywhere from 5 to 10 documents. Could be a PDF, could be Office documents like Word documents. And we're giving it positive examples of things that look like the model and things that are negative examples to help do some of the training. Form processing is built upon things like Power Automate and AI Builder, which has been a Power Platform service. That is trained with PDFs and images. You give it a handful of images. There's the ability to build a collection of similar images. And again, typically I see that happening with a purchase order or an invoice or documents like that that are very well structured and very well formed. So some common scenarios that I've seen, and I work across industries, so I don't focus just on financial services or healthcare or retail. I work across industries. But I see a number of folks from a financial data management. Think about things that might be mortgage documents or tax forms and other documents from a financial perspective. Again, product information are really key. Again, thinking about extracting things from invoices and purchase orders and other sorts of forms that might be there. And then over time, doing more and more with documents like RFPs, again, contracts and other forms of documents. And I'm going to show you an example around, again, not meant to be a full-on contract management solution, but an idea around working with contracts. And I know we've got some of our partners on the line that deal really deep in contracts, but really taking some documents like a contract and actually routing it through for workflow and approval as well. So again, generic examples across industry. I hit on POs and contracts and invoices. We see a lot around HR benefit changes, banking, mortgage applications, and the public sector is just ripe for things. I met with a large government agency today, and we were talking a lot about hybrid work and remote work, but also a huge focus around some of the documents that are coming in paper-based forms and faxes and other things, which I have an example I'm going to show you of some work we did with a partner, Fujitsu, around digitizing and indexing and processing scanned content as well. So with that, I want to spend a little bit of time now going through a form processing example. So I'm going to go through a mix of demonstrations and a little bit of slides here. So in this example, I have our intranet, and our intranet happens to have a number of sites. One of those sites is a finance site. And on the finance site, I have a document library that has a number of purchase orders. Now you notice here, and I'll just zoom in a little bit. I know my resolution might be a little bit low there. So we have a number of documents. So you notice that here's a PDF. We've identified that this is a purchase order. We've extracted metadata like the vendor name, the contact name, the requester, et cetera. I'm going to go ahead and just upload a brand new document. So I've got a folder of them here. Just give me a second to navigate there. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab this purchase order for Fabricam for Christy. And what you're going to see is the document, as it goes up there, it gets uploaded. And now I'm getting a message here that that document is being processed. While that's being processed, I'm going to go in and actually show you kind of what this looks like behind the scenes. So as I go in here and I look at inside of Automate, I can look at the form processing model. So I've already gone in and I've associated a model that I built with this document library. Now, in this case, I have not applied a retention label. If I wanted to, I could say documents that land in this library that get classified with this model could have a certain retention policy, such as, maybe this says PII, or personally identifiable information that maybe we delete it after 7 years. I'm going to go ahead now and pop out into AI Builder. So when I first created the model, and I'm not going to build the entire model for you, I'll kind of do a bit of the cooking show and show you one that I've already built. It went through and it launched me out into AI Builder, and it gave me the ability to create and define this model. Now, the model was created with me supplying a set of documents. So I've already gone through and I've created it. I'm going to edit the existing draft. Now, when I'm working with this model, the very first thing I have to do is define what fields do I want to extract. So I've said I want to extract the vendor name, the contact name, the requester, et cetera. Then when I go through, I then, so I've got a live demo. I then define what's called a collection. So I basically uploaded 5 documents of PDFs that this is a particular format for a particular document type for invoices that look like this. If I have other things that are invoices that might be a slightly different format, or in this case, a purchase order, I could create a new collection, which is another group of documents. I then go through and I basically went through and uploaded the documents, and I went through and highlighted, and it identified a couple of fields initially, but I went through and I highlighted those fields, and I said, well, wherever you see, in this case, a datum, that maps to the vendor name. Where you see Pradeep's name, that maps to the contact name. You see as I hover here on the left, it's kind of highlighting on the right. I did this for those first 5 documents. Then after I did that, AI Builder basically said, I have enough to know what I need to know. Now I can actually look for other documents like this. And whenever I see them, I can go ahead and I can process them. So after I uploaded the documents, I went through and I mapped the fields. I then went ahead and I trained the model. And then once that was done, it automatically popped me back over to SharePoint, and it said, okay, I'm going to create a flow that is going to monitor this document library. And whenever a new document lands in the library, here's the one we just processed, it knows to kick off the workflow. hand off the document to AI Builder. AI Builder does its processing, and then when it's done, it hands back to SharePoint the metadata that it extracted and pushes those into the columns. So here's the model that I uploaded, and if I click into the PDF itself, what you see here is here's the document, and these fields, you'll have to just kind of trust me, map back to the fields that got extracted. So that's kind of the first example around purchase orders. Now, another example that I have here is focused around invoices. So we've worked a lot with, again, partners like Fujitsu, where we can go ahead and we can scan and upload documents. So in this case, I have an invoice here that has been processed. And if you take a peek at it, it looks a little bit differently. So the way this one was done is a similar model for training and capturing and building and developing the model. But the way this actually got processed and captured, and I have a picture of you here, we actually have a Fujitsu scanner. And this is actually a picture of an exhibit that we have on display at the MTC in Boston. We have a Fujitsu scanner, which has a number of scan jobs. Here are some of the invoices that we processed. It could be a fax. It could be, in this case, a scan. When the document comes in, the Fujitsu scanner takes the document. It passes it off into Azure. It then knows that this job is related to the SharePoint document library. It then takes that, creates the PDF, drops the PDF inside of the document library, and then SharePoint Syntex does its thing to process the documents. And then when it's done, those documents just land inside of that document library as another example. So I wanted to show you, again, I couldn't do a live demo here. I didn't want to carry the scanner around with me. But again, a similar idea when we want to capture existing paper-based forms, again, whether it's being scanned in, faxed in, or other ways of capturing those images as well. The last thing I wanted to show real quick from a forms processing perspective is what we've been doing around pre-built models. So I'm going to get into the content center in a little bit and how we build these models. But one of the things that we've done recently is that if I want to build a new document understanding model, you'll see that not only can I go ahead and build a custom model, which I'm going to show you in a second, you'll see that we now have two pre-built model types. So we've already gone through and trained and identified examples that we can process to identify common documents like an invoice or a receipt. Over time, you'll see us build more and more of these pre-built models, some that are generic and kind of horizontal across all industries. And over time, you'll see more and more things that we might be doing that are more industry relevant to other document types as well. So I'll kind of pause, take a breath, check my notes here, see if there's anything I missed, but any questions around forms processing before I get into document understanding? All right. So the second example I want to talk through is really focused around document understanding. And I don't really have a slide here right now, so I'm going to kind of jump into it. And I'm going to come back and frame out how this could apply to things like a contract example. But document understanding is focused a bit more around, as I mentioned, unstructured documents. So if I navigate back to my site, I also have beyond just the finance site, I also happen to have an HR website. Now on the HR website, I have a document library that's looking for things like a benefits change. So if I go in here, you'll notice that there are a number of documents, in this case, Word documents, that I've gone through and I've identified and I've classified as being an HR benefits document. I've similarly gone in and I've extracted and promoted who the insurance provider is, the date of change. In this case, I've assigned a retention label that will only keep the document based on the HR employee information retention policy. And I'm not saying you would show this to your users, but I'm just kind of demonstrating here that we do under the covers keep track of metadata, like how confident we are that we've actually identified and tagged this as the appropriate model, and when this model has actually been applied and the document has been classified. So going in and looking at the document, just so you can see what this looks like, this is a document, again, just a Word document, that when I scan the document and look at it, you'll notice that it says, dear so-and-so, your policy change with this insurance provider, a datum, who happens to have a certain website, is effective on a certain date. So in this case, it is a document that's more freeform than the invoice or the purchase order I showed you, but it does follow a pretty similar pattern that we can use to teach the AI how to identify and classify documents that look like this. So the way that this one was done is inside of our content center, which again is that new site collection that's available with SharePoint Syntex. And if I look at my models, you'll see that I have a number of different types of models that are available across the organization. Here is my HR benefits change classifier. So this one works, again, a little bit different compared to how we're doing things with AI Builder for the structured documents for the forms processing. In this case, I've gone ahead and I've uploaded and provided a number of documents that are both positive examples. I've also given it some negative examples. So the documents that have the N in front of them were ones that I've used to identify negative examples. These ones, very similar to what we might be used to from a search perspective. I've identified what's called an entity extractor, which I'll drill into. But basically, I want to look for and I want to promote finding who the insurance provider is in the data of the benefits change. You see, I've already gone through and I've done some training, and the model believes that it's going to identify this with 100% accuracy. So I've given it enough positive examples and negative examples and enough training that it believes that it can appropriately identify this 100% of the time. And the best analogy I like to use around positive and negative reinforcement, many of you know I have 4 children who I love dearly. But as they've been growing up, I've had to use positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. So they do something well, they get a good grade at school, they behave nicely with their siblings. I do some positive reinforcement. I give them some kudos, maybe a little extra time on the TV or Netflix or whatever. They do something negative, they hit their sister, they do something inappropriate, I might give them a punishment. And that's an example of kind of a negative reinforcement. Same sort of thing happens here with the model. We're giving it positive examples. We're saying, do more of this, or potentially negative examples. And over time, hopefully the model becomes smarter to identify things that are the right thing and not identify things that are kind of the negative or the inappropriate example. The other thing that I've done with this is I've identified which document libraries these models can attach to. So forms processing models get attached to a single document library. These document understanding models can be created centrally through a content center and applied to one or more document libraries. So in this case, I've applied it to that HR benefits change document library. The other thing that I can do with these models, if I look at the model settings, is not only can I apply a retention label, but these types of models can also now have a sensitivity label. So again, retention labels are defining data retention. How long do we keep the content? Sensitivity labels drive information protection. So if a document gets classified with maybe the HR label, maybe it restricts who can see the document. Maybe that retention label then applies a header, a footer, a watermark, some sort of rights protection on the document as well. And once that label is applied, that label then travels with the document. So again, another great benefit is not just the retention labels, but also now having the ability to go out and apply a sensitivity label as well.
Chris, we have a couple of questions in the chat.
Sure.
The first one is from Mike. He says, Chris, is there a transient use case for Syntex for use with migration of documents from a legacy file share? Is there a licensing model that supports that?
So today, SharePoint Syntex only works with content that is stored inside of Office 365. So for the content to be processed by Syntex, it has to have already been migrated in. We're not going to look at existing file servers on-prem. We're not going to look at, again, other on-prem SharePoint sites and what have you. The content has to be ingested. So potentially you could ingest it, run it through, process it, label it, maybe based on that, drive a retention policy to purge the content right away, or drive a security policy to do that. And for that to be done, you do have to have the appropriate licensing, which I'll get into in a little bit, in order for SharePoint Syntex to work across the documents as well.
Thanks, Chris. And then the second question is from Suman. What is a roadmap of SharePoint Syntex for government tenants availability?
Yeah, I have that coming up in a slide later on, but both regular GCC, so the Government Community Cloud, as well as GCC High are on the near-term roadmap. The big difference with the government cloud compared to the commercial cloud is obviously what we have to do around certainly sensitivity and privacy and all that is important in all of our clouds, but the US government cloud has additional requirements around data processing, data handling, and then certainly ITAR requirements around support and all that. So the government cloud tends to get capabilities later than the commercial cloud, just to make sure we can honor our commitment to our government customers.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris.
Sure. Any other questions, Dimitri?
Just those two for the time being.
All right, great. Thanks. Yeah, so if I look at this example, the way that we went ahead and identified the insurance provider, again, as I gave it a set of documents, some positive examples, some negative examples. I then went through and I actually defined and created these classifiers. So if I look at on the train side of things, I gave this model some explanations. So when I'm creating an explanation, I can create a blank one, or I can use an existing template. What I've done is I've said, wherever I see this string, network participation with your insurance provider, preceding it, that's giving us the hint to look for the next set of words, the next set of string that is coming right after that. So I'm saying we'll look anywhere in the file and look for the string that comes after this phrase, and I have another explanation, which is looking for things that are coming after this phrase. Now I can do things like certainly go ahead and say, look anywhere in the file, at the start of the file, the end of the file, a custom range. I can also do things like look for case sensitivity, looking for certain digits, certain letters as well. So again, really powerful when I'm doing that. Now, when I've gone ahead and I've uploaded it, you notice I can see predicted versus labeled. So when I was training it, I went through and I looked at the documents, and then it told me what it predicted would be the correct label. I went through and said, okay, you got it right or you got it wrong. And if you look at the label example, you'll notice that when I uploaded the documents for the purpose of training, it told me that this is the label that I will actually extract. And in the case of the negative ones, you know, so these two negative documents, they were examples of statement of works that are different types of document. And I went ahead and said, there's no label for this. So again, this is an example of a negative example of a document. So the other case that comes up quite a bit with this is, well, what could we do above and beyond what exists inside of Microsoft 365? So can I take this information that's been processed by SharePoint Syntex and do other things with it? I'm going to show you an example, again, of around a contract management example where contracts are being processed. But a very common one we've seen is doing things around an additional search experience. So in this case, I'm leveraging Azure Search. In Azure Search, I've just built a really basic search page as a basic search harness. But the idea with this is that whenever a document lands in the document library and it goes through the document understanding model to process it, that raises an event that something like a Power Automate workflow, or in my case, a logic app, can actually listen for that event. And when it sees that, it can then go ahead and then pass it into Azure Search, which allows me to build a more custom search experience, maybe match this up with other data sets that live outside of Office 365. So the point of this is really to show that there's some flexibility of taking the information, and in this case, who modified it, who created it. But here's some of that information that was processed by SharePoint Syntex, the insurance provider, the classification in terms of the content type that's there as well. I'm going to just close out a couple tabs here. But I'm not going to do a super deep dive on this out of time, but there is a blog post that I will give you as part of the resources. I work with a fellow named Liam Kavanaugh from the Azure Search team. He created a GitHub solution accelerator that's on a public GitHub repo, as well as a blog post that we basically built this on. But the key part of this is inside of Azure, inside of my resource group, I'm leveraging a combination of Azure Search to define the fields and the metadata that I want to promote. I have a little storage account, which is where that HTML web page is hosted. And really where the magic happens is inside of this Logic app. In Logic apps, if you haven't seen them, is very similar to Power Automate. In fact, Power Automate gets a lot of its experience and capabilities built on top of Logic apps, which is an Azure platform service. So all that I'm doing inside of Logic apps is I'm listening for a certain trigger event. And all that I'm saying is that whenever SharePoint Syntex classifies a file with a content understanding model, and I'm telling it to monitor this website in this document library and basically poll every 3 minutes for new items, all that it's doing is just doing an HTTP post, and it's posting the appropriate fields that SharePoint Syntex has extracted from the document library, and it's pushing it into the Azure Search index. And then once it's inside of Azure Search, inside that index, I can build a custom search experience on top of that as well. So again, wanted to just kind of demonstrate some of the flexibility if you wanted to build another experience or actually take some of the value of what's been done in SharePoint Syntex and then extend it to another application. Let's close out a few of these. So with that, we've done a lot of work kind of thinking about scenarios. And one of my colleagues, Thomas Malbach, probably about a year or so ago, actually built a solution accelerator as an example that is publicly available on Microsoft Docs. focused around contract management. So I'm going to walk you through this. The use case is that a user may go to a document library and they might upload a document. SharePoint Syntex will identify and process the information, and it'll extract the metadata from the contract and promote them as columns. Who the client is, the contractor, the fee amount. It will then go ahead and actually kick off a Power Automate workflow that will look for that trigger event. Once that happens, it will then go ahead and send out an approval notification inside of Teams. So you're going to see it actually post to a channel inside of Teams. A team member may review it, they may approve it. If it gets approved, we then write that information out to another system. Could be a CRM system, could be a database. In my case, I pushed it out to a SharePoint list. And then what I've extended this with recently is then taking the information promoted to that list and then using the new document assembly capabilities to actually go ahead and again build a smart document for that as well. So let me show you an example of this. So I'm going to go back to my finance site. And on my finance site, I have some services agreements. And you notice that in this case, we've actually applied some conditional formatting. So when a new service agreement gets uploaded to the document library, the workflow will kick off and the document will move through a state. A brand new document versus a document that's been processed. Has it been approved? Has it been rejected? And then we're applying some formatting to the list, to the document library, to give it a different treatment. So approved documents are showing up in blue, rejected documents have a red header. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to upload a brand new document. So here's a contract document for Christy. As I do this, the document, again, just like you saw before, is going to show that it's being processed. So in this case, I had already identified, here's the Christy client document. Here's a little thumbnail for the document. And over time, you're going to start to see the workflow is going to wake up. It's going to process the information, and it's going to start to then post over here into Teams. So what I have set up here is I have a team set up for contract management. I have a number of different tabs that I pinned. So I have a tab here that's displaying the service agreement. So here's that view. So again, that Christy client document is still being processed. Once things get approved, I then have a payout list, which again, you'll see as I go through the process, we'll actually go ahead and promote the documents and actually, again, push the information around who the client is, the contractor, the fee amount, things like that as well. So I'm going to go here and I'm just going to check on the status of my document being processed. So again, the Christy document is still being processed. So while that's going on, I'm going to give you a peek into the workflow. So what's happening behind the scenes is there is a Power Automate workflow that is running. The Power Automate workflow will wake up once the document's been classified, so it hasn't been classified yet. But once the document goes through and the document gets classified by SharePoint Syntex, which usually takes a few seconds, but once the document gets processed, we're going to have a trigger in Power Automate that looks for the file being classified by the content understanding model. So again, we're monitoring the finance website and the service agreement document. We're then going ahead, and as we route it through approval, we're then going ahead and we're marking the status of the document to be in review. And then we're posting an adaptive card into Teams, which is then notifying people to review and approve it. We're then checking for the response. So if someone approves the document, we're updating the status in SharePoint to be approved. We're then writing an item out to the payout list, and then we're posting back to that channel that the document's been approved. If it's been rejected, we just go ahead and we reject it. We obviously don't write that out to the payout list. So what we should say is my document should have been processed. So Christy's document is out there. You notice that it's been processed. So I can now see that it's in a new state. But not only is it in a new state, but we can see here's the client name. We extracted the metadata, so we know who the contractor is. We know the fee amount. And you can see it was just classified about a minute ago. If I go over into Teams, I should see now a post that's sitting there and telling me that this document has been submitted for approval. If I click into the document, here's Christy's document, and you notice that it has, the client is Christy, certain information about the terms, the conditions. Again, very similar way to the other documents. We've actually gone ahead and extracted that information from the document. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say, looks great, which is going to approve it. That approval, as you saw in the workflow, it's going to go back and it's going to update the status of the document. It's then going to go ahead and it's going to write out a new record over to that SharePoint list. So if I go back and I take a peek at the services agreements just through my view here, what you should see is here's that Christie document, and that document moved from being in a new state to an approved state. And if I look at the for payout list, what you'll see here is a new record got written by the workflow to say, we're ready to pay out to Christie. Now, the piece that I've recently extended this with is if I go back to my SharePoint site, and I have a library that's looking at payout. This is some of the new document assembly capabilities. So there's a new action that's available that gives me the ability to create what's called a modern template. So what I did is I can show you real quick. I have a payment template that I created here within inside of the Word document that I'm saying basically thank you, and I'm putting in a token value client for your business. Your payment for contractor in fee amount has been approved. So this is basically an example of a document that I want to create or I want to assemble based on metadata that's already been processed. So if I go back to my document library, I'm going to click on the payment template, kind of the content type that's there. When I click on this, it's going to give me the ability to rename the document. So I'm going to call this my Christie Payment Boston. And I can go through now and I bound it to that SharePoint list. So it knows that here's the different items that are out there in the SharePoint list. I can go ahead and sort this. So I'm going to get the most recent one. I've done this a few times. I'm going to say I want this most recent approval. And now when I say OK to this, it knows from that document that Christie is the contractor. She works with Contoso, and the fee amount is $38,000. And now when I say create the document, it's going to go out and use that smart template. And here's that brand new Christie payment document. And when I click into this document, it basically replaced those tokens with the actual values, right? So thank you, Contoso, for your business. Your payment for Christie in the amount of $38,000 was approved. So again, it's enabling us to build these smart, intelligent templates. Now, the list that I use happened to be written out by SharePoint Syntex extracting it and then a workflow writing it to a list. It could be any other list. So you don't have to do document assembly in connection with the example I showed you around document processing and form processing. But I just thought it was a nice way of kind of tying together a few different pieces in that scenario. So I'm going to pause before I go on to the roadmap and the resources. Any questions around any of that, around, again, the document understanding or the content assembly or any of those other pieces that I just walked through? Yeah, I'm just making sure there's nothing I've missed. What's that?
There's no questions in the chat yet.
Did I lose the audience or are folks still with us?
Yep, we have everyone and more still with us.
Oh, you kept everybody. It's a good group.
Awesome. Yeah, so the other thing that we've done recently is we have started to create a number of lookbook templates. So if folks are familiar with the SharePoint lookbook, we recently published 2 new lookbook templates specifically focused around SharePoint Syntex. One is this contracts management site. So the idea here is that it does include some sample text, some ideas around how you might lay out a contract management site inside of SharePoint. So maybe folders for non-disclosure agreements, different resources you might want to put out there. But if you go to the lookbook site and you focus and filter in on SharePoint Syntex, you notice that we now have the SharePoint Syntex contracts management site template. We also have a generic SharePoint Syntex content center model. So the team has done a really great job of giving you some basic examples that are of sample models that you can use for training, as well as some examples of documents you can use to actually process. So the idea is helping you to bootstrap very quickly, building your own form processing model, your own document understanding model, with some test documents as well. There's also a really great set of learning pathways, training resources as well to help you get started with SharePoint Syntex. And there's also some new adoption resources to help you get started there as well. The other resources I'm going to go through in a second, but since I'm here, I did a blog post actually almost this time last year, May of 2021, where I did a blog post around getting started with Project Cortex, both SharePoint Syntex and Viva Topics. And a lot of the demos that I did were actually documented with screenshots and links out to the articles, the resources, and a lot of the things that you may want to do to build something similar, including the Azure Search example. I have a link in the slide view as well to the contracts management example that, again, my colleague Thomas built out. He did a really great job of describing the business problem, as well as putting out some examples and scripts and solutions for you to do. And then here's a good blog post that Chris McNulty did back in November, which a lot of the things that Chris announced back in November at Ignite have now been realized within SharePoint Syntex. A lot of new things that I just showed you came out in the December and January timeframe. A few more things coming out in February. And then as I go into the roadmap in a little bit, a few more things coming up over the next couple of months as well.
Chris, we have a couple of questions. Suman is asking, what is the Syntex site collection and what is the site quota limit?
Great question. So the SharePoint Syntex site collection is I think I might have closed the window, but it is the content center. So I have an example here of the content center, which is the site collection that holds the models. The SharePoint Syntex template in the lookbook basically gives you a prettied up version of the content center that has some more explanatory text and examples of other models. But the content center is really just a SharePoint Online site collection. So it has the same limits and boundaries of any other site collection. It's just another new site template focused around collecting the models for SharePoint Syntex.
Thanks, Chris. And the second question comes from Naveen. Naveen says, can we set up PDFs as a template? We have some very old scanned PDF documents. Can we set them as templates?
So I'm assuming that's referring to some of the things that I was showing you around the smart assembly and the documents piece is my guess. So let me just go back to the finance site real quick. I've only tested myself with Word. So if the use case is around this example where I want to say create a new document from a template, I haven't seen it using the PDF, but certainly you can take a PDF and make a Word document out of that and then use that as the smart template that we're using. And then certainly you can use PDF documents themselves as a source for SharePoint Syntex to process. So SharePoint Syntex can process against PDFs, as the example with this purchase order. We can process against images, and then certainly the document understanding models can leverage unstructured documents like Word documents as well.
Thanks, Chris. I mean, did that answer your question? If not, maybe come off mute if you need to elaborate it further.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, these documents are pretty old. They're from like 60s, 70s, actually. So they're just recently scanned and they want to, process the metadata within those documents. So I was just wondering if Syntex can do that.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say, yeah, trust but verify. But the example I was showing was focused around invoices. So in this case, these are images, are PDFs that were captured via a fax or a scan. So this happened to be a paper-based image that I scanned in with the Fujitsu scanner, and then it created the PDF, and then that PDF was processed in the document library. Great. Any other questions, Dimitri?
Not yet.
Okay. Great. So roadmap. Again, this is a kind of a backward-looking and a forward-looking roadmap. As I mentioned, some things that we announced back in Ignite have since been shipped and delivered. So specifically around Syntex, which is what we're focused on tonight. The content assembly, that was the example I showed you with that smart document template. The contract management site template that I showed you, as well as some of the things that I didn't show you around some of the advanced metadata search. So when you're searching inside of SharePoint, actually having the ability to search based on the content type and leverage some of the metadata inside of the search experience. GCC high availability is on the roadmap. I'd have to go to the public roadmap site for the definitive date. I don't want to guess at that, but if you go to roadmap.office.com, that is the source of record for all of the public roadmap information. There's the ability to filter based on Viva as well as by SharePoint Syntex, and then you can actually filter based on cloud. So for my government customer today, they had a lot of questions around Teams features that were coming. And we went to the roadmap site, and we then just kind of filtered it by government cloud. And it gave us the target dates for when these things would start to hit both the GCC cloud as well as GCC High. Other things that are coming soon is certainly more and more work with the graph, as well as more support for other languages above and beyond just working with documents in English. Certainly top of mind for us are French, German, Italian, and Spanish. And you're going to continue to see more of the integration within Viva Topics. So as I mentioned, Viva Topics having that ability to show up not just inside of SharePoint and Microsoft Search. You're going to start to see the topics popping up inside of Outlook, inside of Yammer, inside of Teams. As I mentioned, I'll show you real quick. We now have, I know this is more of a syntax session, but if I go back into Teams, we now do have the Viva Topics app available. So I just deployed this myself this week. This app is not available directly inside of the Teams App Store. There is a PowerShell script you need to run because you need to map this to your topic center, because you could have different topic centers at different paths. But once you do that, it does then build the zip file, it builds the manifest file. You can pick the images that you use, whether they're the standard images we provide or our own custom image. You can pick the name. So if you don't want to name it Viva Topics, you can give it a different name. But that then starts to bring front and center the topic center site collection, which is more focused around Viva Topics and topic discovery as well. But you'll start to see more Viva Topics integration with the rest of the suite over the next few weeks as we start to light up the integration in Outlook and Yammer and Teams as well. Another big thing on Viva Topics is integration with inside of Yammer. We're calling Question Concierge. We've been testing that inside of Microsoft. Really neat. When I'm posting a question to Yammer, I can tag the question with the topic. The topic then knows who are the people that know something about that. And then there's basically a concierge, a bot that reaches out to people at round robins and picks 2 people at a time. It will then loop them into the conversation in Yammer to help them answer it. And then over time, as questions are being answered, they're being marked as the best response. That whole feedback loop gets fed back into Viva Topics to identify not just SMEs and documents, but questions that have been asked and answers that have been provided as well. So again, a lot more we'll talk about here on the roadmap, but those are kind of the key things that are top of mind of things that either ship soon or will be coming soon. And you'll hear more over the next few weeks about future things that'll come on the roadmap later in 2022. So here's a licensing slide. So I mentioned earlier that Viva Topics and SharePoint Syntex are both add-ons. So if you want to use Viva Topics, you either buy the Viva Topics license per user per month, or you buy it as part of the Viva suite. SharePoint Syntex is sold on its own. So neither Viva Topics nor SharePoint Syntex are included in any of the existing Office 365 or Microsoft 365 suites. SharePoint Syntex, a big change that came out recently, this was in the January timeframe, was that if it's someone that just needs to view the list inside of SharePoint Syntex, so they're not creating the model, they're not uploading documents to the list or the library, but they're basically just looking at the metadata, or they're participating in a process later on, like the workflow example, you no longer have to license the people that are just consuming the metadata, but the people that are creating the models, the people that are uploading the documents into the library, those folks still need to be licensed, but they did lower the licensing requirement to make that more available to others. Certainly things like the content assembly, the document assembly, some of those things, using those smart templates, those are also considered part of the premium license for SharePoint Syntex as well. With SharePoint Syntex, you see at the bottom, you do get a certain amount of capacity and credits. So for AI Builder, which is what we're using for the forms processing model, you do get 1 million AI Builder monthly credits for form processing. And again, a lot of it's based off of the number of users that you have. So there's a minimum of 300 users to get that. And then there's additional pooled storage that you start to get for Microsoft Search for crawling external content outside of Microsoft 365, whether it's ServiceNow or Salesforce or MediaWiki, Confluence or whatever, you do get some additional pooled storage for that as well. So we're right around time. I know I've got about 5 minutes left for additional questions, but a number of resources that we've put out there. The main spot for everything SharePoint Syntex is the SharePoint Syntex landing site. I mentioned some of the resources that are there, including the new adoption site that's focused around SharePoint Syntex adoption. There's some good videos, some good clickable demos. If you don't yet have a SharePoint Syntex environment, and you want to review it, as well as here's some of the documentation that's out there, and then those blog posts and articles that I referred to earlier. Here's that link to my blog post around the getting started with SharePoint Syntex and Viva Topics. Again, I'll be sure to publish these slides as well for you all, but I did create a short link for that. And then here is a link, which again, when you get the slides, you can click through it. This is the link to Thomas's article on Microsoft Docs around the contract management solution accelerator example that I showed you as well. With that, I've got about 3 or 4 minutes left for additional questions. I know that was a lot to cover, as usual, in kind of auctioneer style mode. So I know I went very quick through that, so I wanted to save time to answer any other questions that folks have or circle back on anything that we haven't addressed already.
So this is Bill. I had a quick question about licensing. If you have a document center, typically you would have your flows and your processes already developed. Do you have to license all the users that are in there? Because you mentioned people uploading them, because I almost envision something coming in, getting routed and doing it like a service account or something.
Yeah, this is where I'm not a licensing expert, so I don't want to give you bad guidance. I defer to the product use rights. What we don't want to do is encourage people to just license one user, because there's a lot of compute and storage and processing behind it. So a lot of times when you get into creating like service accounts, not saying you're doing it often, people are trying to find ways to license just one person for the entire company, which also often circumvents the intent and spirit of a licensing model.
Yeah, I was thinking it more from the workflow model. Like you have stuff that comes in, it gets curated, decided to go to a document center, and then the document center then processes it.
Yeah, I defer to the product use rights. I know initially the answer was a lot clearer, that anyone that benefited from Syntex, whether they were creating a model, uploading a document, or getting value from the metadata extracted, had to be licensed. Once we removed that requirement around the people consuming it, again, I'm not a licensing expert. I don't want to give you bad guidance, so I'll kind of defer you to the product use rights document for that. Any other questions? Hopefully this was helpful. I know it's tough to be remote. I'm really looking forward to, number one, seeing many of you in Vegas in a few weeks at the Microsoft 365 conference. Again, I'll be doing a revised and updated version of this session with a couple of tweaks, as well as another session around some of the SharePoint admin and governance enhancements. But also looking forward to being back in person with this user group, when folks feel comfortable being back in our offices.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Chris. Great presentation as always.
Awesome. Thanks for inviting me back.
So I will take screen share with just a few closing slides and a raffle that we have at the end. So one thing we wanted to give a quick shout out to our group is that we are seeking speakers for this year. We have the next month or so booked out, but we are seeking about 5 or 6 additional speakers for this year. So if you are interested in sharing your knowledge, please come submit this form and let us know what you'd like to talk about and when. We have some great, we have different types of presentations at this user group. We have, ones like Chris that are giving you a full kind of top down, this is what things are going to look like going forward, some new features coming out. But we also have a lot of presentations that are really case studies in terms of, hey, look at this project that we just completed, and these are like the challenges that we ran into and how we overcame them. Or sometimes we have presentations where somebody says, here's a really niche part of the platform that you might not use day to day, but here's what it is and how it works. Like, for example, Chrissy gave a great presentation on Sway last year that many of us probably don't use day to day or as often as we could. So with that being said, you don't have to be technical. And if you have something to share, please let us know. Part of the community of this user group is really that, we all have our own perspectives and our own knowledge that others simply can't have because nobody knows it all on this platform. So that being said, I'm going to pass the mic over to Mike to talk to us about some of these upcoming events that we have in the near future.
All right. Thank you, Dimitri. Okay, so on this slide, we have the Microsoft community calls. These are wonderful, wonderful resources. I can't say enough how much I love these calls. I participate in at least half of these calls as often as I can. And they're just fantastic people doing amazing things. a lot of these, they'll split them up and they'll have like multiple demos set up throughout the call as well. And also it's an opportunity to get in touch with some of the Microsoft people that are working directly with these platforms. So it can be a good place to give some feedback, and they've been very receptive to that sort of stuff. So next slide, please. Some upcoming events. There is a Microsoft Business Applications launch event. This is a single session, so it's not a conference, but just a class being hosted by Microsoft. That's on April 6th, and that is online. The link is available here. The European Power Platform Conference is going to be in Berlin on April 6th through 8th. And Teams Nation is going to be online. That's coming up soon. That's next week, actually, on March 23rd. And then the Scottish Summit now has a new date, and that new date is June 10th through 7th. I'm sorry, 10th through 11th. And this is actually a free event to register for, but they're requesting donations for the registration, and donations go to a program, I think it's called Rock Hill, to feed homeless children in Scotland. But yeah, so that's it. Very, very affordable and great causes there. And also the Microsoft 365 conference, which of course I mentioned, is going to be there. And that's in Vegas on April 3rd, 4th, and 8th.
That is what their website says as of right now, so I'm gonna run with it.
Yeah, I can tell you, like I said, there's pre-conference days on Monday and post-conference days on Friday. The core conference is the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So I think the dates are 4th and 8th are the workshops. 5th through the 7th are the actual conference dates.
And I could have sworn that I added that to this slide, but whatever.
Okay,
Yeah.
all good.
Yeah, it's in Vegas. Have a blast. Is there anything we missed? Anybody else know of any other upcoming events? A lot of these events, I actually learned about a lot of these events yesterday from the Power Apps community call. So that's why a lot of them are Power based. Nothing else? All right. So we also have some other community events. We have the the Women IT Pros, which is a monthly event. Power Addicts, which is irregular, and the Power Hour, which is every Wednesday at noon. So these are Microsoft topics being hosted by non-Microsoft employees. And then some of our sister user groups. We have the SharePoint Rhode Island user group, and they meet on the first Tuesday of every month. We have the Hartford Office 365 user group, which meets on the last Wednesday or Thursday of every month. And the Granite State SharePoint user group, which meets on the first Thursday of every month. And also, if you guys are interested, there's always the Boston Azure group and the Power BI user group. So with that, we're going to open this up to you guys. Does anybody have any issues that they've run into that they wanted to pick any of our brains with, or any cool tips or tricks that they learned? Feel free to take yourself off mute and give us a holler. So next week we will have somebody speaking, next month rather. We will be getting together on the third Thursday. That's April 21st. And someone will present something. We will be in touch with updates on that, but it will happen on April 21st. And just a huge thanks to our platinum sponsor, Turn Digital. They help us to keep everything up and running and present this wonderful content to you guys. So again, we couldn't do it without them. So thank you to Turn Digital and also to all of our past sponsors. We are a big fan of the community and, you know, like to give back as much as we can.